Just a second. Thank you very much, Lucas. Thank you very much to those, big thanks to those who came here. I hope that you can hear me, and if there is some technical issues, just let me know as soon as you can. So my name is Anton, and first of all, I need to apologize, first of all, because this paper, I guess, could be the very least valuable part of the excellent TRAC webinar series. The reason for this is quite simple. It is the least, to be honest, the least archaeological paper among those who I listened to. I guess that it may occupy the top of the charts of the non-that archaeological papers ever delivered here. Sorry for this. And one could have expected it, because by training, I'm not an archaeologist, but a historian. And this reflects a Russian specific of education and training. Here, the ones who study Roman provinces are considered as historians and trained to deal with the topics as historians, with primary focus on written evidence and the lack of any archaeological training. Of course, there are exceptions. Always there are exceptions, but and I hope there will be more exceptions. But still, those who study Roman provinces here are historians, not archaeologists. So I think I can say freely that I do not have an imposter syndrome. I am the real imposter here. But hopefully sometimes even imposters can be a bit useful. As we say in Russia, мы твой недуг в подвиг обратим, or we going to turn your weakness into an advantage. So what will this paper be about? I'm sorry, just a second. Hope you see the second slide, the second page. This is me. I've kept my bow tie, but I've lost my rabbit ears, sadly. This is the end of December 1990. And I'm waiting to see how far the Soviet Union will fall. Actually, I don't know about this yet, but I'm looking at the future, in the bright future at that moment. So what will this paper will be about? It will be about possible interconnections and interactions between our experience and our understanding of the past. The idea of this paper and this paper started actually a long time ago, from the moment when I was working on my PhD thesis about Roman Britain. This was a great time, to be honest, the time when I had just discovered a wonderful world of Romanization debate, which was totally unknown for Russian readers at that time. And it was a time when I had to rethink all my views on Roman Empire, its provinces, and Roman imperialism. And I noticed that social-cultural change under empire, the results of this change are the issues that I'm most interested in. And then I thought, why? Why does it feel the most important to me, the most important of all topics? So there was a moment, and for dramatical effect, I need to say that it happened all of a sudden in the bleak midnight, and there was a sense of danger, but actually I was drinking tea. It was a moment when I realized that I am myself, was and still is a result of social cultural change, biological, social and cultural, or the change that happened under empire, though of course another empire, not Roman. My mom is Russian, my father is Kazakh, and they met at Kiev, which was peaceful then. And if there was no Russian Empire and later Soviet Union, I would have never appeared. So this is a quite personal question to me. Furthermore, the fall of the empire doomed the thing that could have become my family. My parents stayed where they were, mom in Russia and dad in Kazakhstan. And from 1991, it turned out that they were living not in different regions of a huge country, but in different countries. So this was the moment when I realized that I'm interested in these particular aspects of Roman imperialism because my own life and my own personal experience was shaped by empire and post-imperial reality. So this is why this paper will be, and you can see on disclaimer, that it will be very personal. It will deal with trauma of our society. I guess not only Russian, but all post-Soviet societies, maybe even Eastern European society, but I can't say for this, to be honest. And this will have some silly jokes because I can't live without silly jokes. Sorry for this, but it will end soon. So overall, all of this led me to another question. Can contemporary experience, my own personal experience, as well as experience of the community I live in, be useful for studies of Roman Empire and imperialism? And if they can, then how? In general, and it's a spoiler, I think yes, they can. Various experience may be useful, especially experience of life on imperial ruins, experience of crisis, transformation, and globalization. You can see the center of Moscow, the heart of Russia, and this is what it looked like in the beginning of 90s. So they may be useful, though modern Russia, of course, seems to be very far in many aspects from Roman Empire. But we'll get back to this later. Before we'll speak about life on imperial ruins, I would like to speak a bit about theory. Let's say there are two main conceptual theoretical roots or core ideas of this paper. First one is related to my training as a historian, actually a teacher of history and social sciences. There were some key works and scholars that we were expected to read. First of all, Marc Bloch, one of the founding fathers of analyst school, a great French medievalist. Then Russian-Soviet researchers who mixed ideas of Marxism and structuralism, like Mikhail Bakhtin, literary theorist, and Aron Gurevich, who studied Middle Ages, as well as Marc Bloch. All of these works were promoting idea of the dialogue between the scholar and the source. Maybe the best words, like the best saying, the best things, words about this were written by Aron Gurevich. You can see this quotation, which is translated by me. It's said it's not published in English. So the main idea is that not only the scholar formulates questions to gather some information, but sources themselves question the scholar and bring to the emerging narrative the experience, personal views, and background of the one who studies. From my point of view, it is not just a dialogue, but the dialogue crucial to the plot of cognitive process. And like in some video games, it's an annoying dialogue that cannot be skipped. We always have this dialogue, even if they do not reflect it. So I do believe that these words by Gurevich remain true when we move from Middle Ages, the topic he studied, to the studies of Roman Empire and imperialism. And our environment and experiences affect our research more than we are able sometimes to see and to reflect. Another route is placed in recent studies of Roman imperialism. Mostly there were works by David Mattingly and Michael John Voslus. I'm sorry for pronouncing it wrong. I tried to learn it, but it's a bit too hard for me. So, as you all know, Mattingly was focused on the issues of different identities and discrepant experiences in Roman world, and papers by Voslus were dedicated to globalization theory. One of the most recent papers by Michael John Voslus about Romanization as a theory of friction is of particular interest. You can see that it was published like a couple of years ago, so it's really fresh. So, and I put the quotation from the very end of the paper, which I found like the most important here, because here he points that the concept of friction can be useful for studies and understanding of Rome as the effect of global interaction, of brutal and of sometimes brutal encounters across differences, and hence the result of friction. It is worth noting that the concept of friction was introduced by a famous anthropologist, Anna Lewenhaupt-Zinn, and actually she called it more like a metaphor than a concept or a theory. So theory is, I guess, it's Voslow's innovation, as far as I can judge. So, and you can see I put on the slide, like from the introduction, several descriptions of the friction. So it is really interesting, and I think that it has some potential. And I'm really happy that the metaphor of friction is now being introduced in Roman studies. Roman imperial studies, there is a paper of Roman religion dealing with theory concept of friction. So friction, for me, the most important thing that the most important quote is the first one, that cultures are continually co-produced in their interactions, called friction, the awkward, unequal, unstable, and creative qualities of interconnection across difference. You can see it very well. So Anna Lovenhaupt-Zinn applied it to the history and modernity of Indonesia. And my question is that, like, after all, if modern history of Indonesia can be helpful for those who study Roman Empire and imperialism, then why the experience of one fallen Northern Empire cannot serve similar purpose? So I feel that Russian and post-Soviet, as well as Soviet and post-Soviet experiences can be helpful when we speak of two processes in the past and in the present and actually in the future. The decline and fall of the empire and of imperial way of being, and second, of globalization. This is what we have experienced here for a decade in the 90s. The dissolution of what was once thought to be eternal and the spread of new forms of culture, a deep transformation of a very specific everything into a very global everything. I will try to elaborate these conceptual and quasi-theoretical points by looking at three sides of the transformations that Russia, I guess, as well as other post-Soviet countries, experienced in the 90s: power, economy, and material culture. Of course, this is merely a set of sketches, not a detailed and comprehensive analysis. Please keep it in mind. Let's start with the power. So, in short, last years of the Soviet Union and the first decade of Russian history were a time, Russian Federation history, let's call it so, were a time when power was constantly contested. The struggle between different elite groups, the big social, civil conflicts, the undeclared civil war, actually, which will, I suppose, come back quite soon. The transformation of high class from party nomenclature into a set of oligarchs and bosses. All of this is well known because it happened on the macro level. You can see the pictures from 1993. This is what how the new elite of Russia taught stupid people of Russia democracy. How should democracy look like? So I guess you can understand where the roots of some of the current situation. So, but on the micro level, actually, and as well as on meso level, the levels that Voslaus mentions, things were experienced in a different way. Here, the president of democratic Russia, Boris Yeltsin, was mocked as a drunkard and a stupid guy, and his name was frequently said as Borka Durak, Boris the Stupid. And the real power was contested in another way, with much more focus on local violence. And official bodies and police didn't play a significant part here. The main contestants were various gangs, and the line between legal business and illegal activities was almost non-existent. You can see the guys who were contesting the power on meso and micro level, the so-called Bratva, New Russians, Novy Ruski, or just bandits. Some of them were pretending to be a kind of social bandits, like Hobsbawm described sometime several decades ago, but actually they were just bandits. And this phenomenon was built of mixed cultural features, which is really interesting to us. Among them, there was a subculture of Soviet jails, the traumatic experience of Afghanistan and Chechnya wars, but also things that were brought by globalization, like bodybuilding culture, karate, Hollywood action movies, and fancy pants, as you can see them here on the picture. Their visual representation and material culture was built around globalized images and things. One can say that Schwarzenegger and Van Damme, baseball bats, and old Mercedes cars formed the outlook and the behavior of these bandits more than anything else. So it was Russian, but local Russian, but actually a globalized phenomenon. So the violence they brought and contest for power were omnipresent. On all levels, they were interconnected with different cultural traits that were absent before. One can actually recall the appearance in Russia in 90s, later than bodybuilders of this kind, or later than Bratva, the appearance of football ultras and hooligans and skinheads who here actually were more like boneheads, not sharpskins or redskins. And but I have a really like a weird case to say about this omnipresent violence and contest for power. In my school, there were two groups of students. One group was listening to Prodigy, and another group was listening to Scooter, old German band, and they were constantly fist fighting each other in order to establish local hegemony, to become a local bandits, local bratva. We can say this, of course, with commas. I luckily was listening to ZZ Top and just tried to stay out of trouble. What for all of this story of bratva and other local violence? What for it is it needed? Why it could be important for us? I think that it can be helpful. By the way, that was how they started. This is how they ended usually. So it can be helpful when we look at the periods of social crises. So later Roman Empire is one of the best topics for this, but also I guess the transition from Iron Age societies to Roman Empire, when the existing rules become less significant and the usual power relations and hierarchies do not work anymore. And let us say it can be helpful for us to understand what is behind the definition of bugouts, who were you can see the drink water return and Leon's monograph were described as the guys which look a lot like bratva guys. So I guess the study of Bagaude and the archaeology of social movements, local social movements and local violence, both can benefit from that Russian and not only Russian experience. Of course, this contest of power was another side of the radical economic change. The bandits, those guys, were just the forerunners of capitalism. And those who survived later became respectable businessmen. But the transition from state-controlled economy to free market was quite fast and very painful for the mass of people. Not only it was closely connected to the rise of bandits, but it also created a totally new social reality, built on the highest rate of inequality and unfair redistribution of resources, land and factories. It was called privatization, but actually I guess the robbery is the much better word for this. The so-called privatization created a huge private sector of economy, but also it was on macroeconomic level. But on meso and micro level, it left the majority of people without money and resources. It turned out that the people just found themselves, working people, and most of the country were working people, of course. It turned out that these people found themselves alienated from the results of their labor, from the land they plowed, and from the factories they worked at. Instead, they had vouchers, it's kind of stock for privatization, and it was expected that they will invest these vouchers to get some part of property. But actually, most of people just sold their vouchers. I recall my mother and me was going to market and we sold these vouchers and got some small amount of money to buy some food, because it was, I guess, 1994 and there was not enough money and food everywhere. So for many people who worked for their whole life at one place and worked their fathers and mothers, this privatization was a fatal blow that cracked the core of their identity. And it is yet to be studied how many people and how much were affected by this. But there are only some excellent artistic reflection of this. And one of the best of the examples is a movie called Ukraine, which was filmed in 1998. You can see the still from this movie depicting an oligarch. The plot of this movie is quite simple, and it reflects the typical situation for Russia in the 90s. several farmers suddenly learned that their land are not there anymore. It is now belong not to them as a collective, but to a greedy oligarch who wants to get the oil, this blood of the land, how he calls it. And they put some revenge. So Ukraine is one of the best movies ever filmed on Russia, in my opinion. It is a great mix of noir and Eastern, and it promotes ideas of social justice and people's revenge. What for may we need this information? I guess that this is another steal from Ukraine. This is one of those who bring revenge to that greedy oligarch you've seen before. This can be important when we look at the stories that followed Roman expansion, the stories of the introduction of new land divisions, of land and resources redistribution, because it is often stated like something quite usual, an ordinary event, and just simple action by Rome. Yeah, Rome came, Rome took the land, Rome won, natives lost, imperialism, so cool, baby, yes. But such simplifying statements, like just a retelling of this Tacitus famous quote, describing the bitter fate of Trinovantes who were stripped of their lands. These simplifying statements create the narrative without this forced alienation, without this trauma Trinovans and other people who lost their land to Rome experienced. And we don't see this painful deprivation that working people experienced. This is bad, in my opinion, and this is where our personal experience can be helpful. Another common economic theme for post-Soviet 90s was an emergence of financial frauds and pyramids. The most known of them was MMM, created by Sergei Mavrodi. You can see a still from the commercial of this company, very famous with Leonid Golubkov in the main role. The success of such schemes was largely determined by the lack of financial knowledge and skills among the common people living in Russia and Ukraine and other post-Soviet countries. Most of the former Soviet citizens had no experience with private financial institutions, and this, as well as the total trust to commercials and TV, made them extra vulnerable. What for this may be useful? I guess, again, we can look at the events before that led to the Boudica rebellion and look at the famous passage of Dio, who is describing the situation with debts when Britons could not pay when Romans demanded for money, and this sparked rebellion. Romans and notably most notably Seneca. The situation here described by Dio seems to be clear, but what if we have here the case similar to what I've seen and experienced? It could be that the same event, like giving money and taking money, could mean different things for both sides, for Romans and for Britons. For Romans, it was a usual case of loan and debt, and they expected to get their money back because they know how it works. They knew how it worked. But Britons could have been unfamiliar with such financial scheme, and for them, like Soviet citizens were, and for them, it could have looked like a fortune, a luck, a generous gift. And the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding of the situation created the ground for the conflict, just as it happened for the people who were fooled by financial pyramids. And there was one more crucial change connected to the economy, the change for the metrics, the pattern of the whole economy, the transformation of values. And this was experienced on every level, but especially on micro level. Things that were considered rare, sometimes were barely legal, and they were important because of it, like jeans, sneakers, bubble gums, of course, rare in Soviet times. In post-Soviet time became widely available and thus lost their value. Others, like books, just lost their value and stopped being an indicator of social rank and obligatory attribute of middle and high class houses. And the transformation of values was closely connected to the transformation of material culture, which was really deep and really rapid. It was an experience of getting globalized in a very short period, and it was felt on every level and in every aspect of life. It must be said that this phenomenon of Soviet material culture and post-Soviet material culture has only recently become the topic of study. So, not that much was said about it. But from my personal perspective, this was the most visible, the most experienced of all changes that happened in early Russia. After all, a kid like me in 90s rarely knows politics and macroeconomics well enough, but always notice the new things and objects. I guess like a kid in Gaul, in Spain, Roman Spain, or in Gallia Belgica, like they felt the same. New things are noticeable and big processes are not seen, are not visible. This new material culture actually was a mix, sometimes awkward and weird, of different elements. It was, if we use things metaphor, it was a friction, a result of friction. People have to deal with the increasing amount. I guess we need to imagine this. People have to deal with the increasing amount of different food products and groceries, with different producers and dynamic prices. And it was a striking contrast with Soviet times, where the limited range of goods and prices were forming a landscape of everyday stability, like eternal stability. So it was like a dive in the ocean after you've only seen a small pool in kindergarten. For example, newspapers were trying to help people and were publishing the table of barcodes, so one could identify the manufacturing countries. So everybody learned here the phrase "made in." I guess it was the first English phrase for most of people living in Russia. Russian origin of an object was often considered as lame. German, French, Italian, American ones were a completely different story. This was the time when some very specific terms like Euro-remont or Euro renovation or Euro redecoration appeared. This term was used to denote the style of redecoration different from the previous Soviet examples, with old-fashioned papers, glorious Yugoslavian furniture, and weird bronze plates with peasant children. But actually, I suspect nobody actually knew and know now today what this Euro renovation actually means, because this is Euro renovation, and I guess the last of Bourbon has died here. And this is also Euro renovation if we look at the web. But actually, it is not like this old, not Euro renovation flats. So, and people would try to do Euro-remont in their flats to make them look more globalized, more modern, better, and more expensive. Of course, needless to say that most of the material for such redecorations was not of European origin. It seems that people were inventing foreign, European in this case, creating an image of a new material culture, taking only some elements from that globalizing pattern and sometimes filling them with another meaning. Like those bats you've seen, real ones and imposters, they loved baseball bats, but they had no idea about who Babe Ruth was. The pockets of their fancy Adidas tracksuits were full with fried sunflower seeds, a typical Russian snake. And well, as I promised, this paper will be personal. It is a bit personal already, but we go into the personal extreme. Here is my bandy stick. It was made in late Soviet Union and Leningrad, but I used to play it. Bandy is a hockey game which played on a huge ice pitch with a ball, with a small plastic ball, not with a puck, and they have a big goal. So this is a stick to play bandy, to play a ball, but I used it to play with a puck and to imagine myself as a hockey player. You can see those texts made with a permanent marker, yes, made in China, this marker was. Numbers and surnames of my favorite ice hockey players. Here you can see Patrick Roy, number 33 from Colorado Avalanche. Actually, I hadn't seen them playing, but I knew about them from newspapers and short video reviews, and I imagined myself Martin Brodeur or Patrick Roy when I was in the Greece, which was actually not a Greece, but 2 empty cans on an icy asphalt not far from school. And we have here another interesting thing related to a new material culture, to the post-imperial and still globalized material culture phenomenon here. It is a kind of myth that is now being created, a myth about 90s culture. And here you can see snack packs back to 90s that one can buy in Russian shops and markets today. So there are a lot of there is a lot of web communities where users share and discuss the experience with objects like those famous USA baseball caps with an eagle that we all had once. Don't forget to break this visa because flat visa is lame. So what for this needed? I guess this material culture, new material culture, globalized and post-imperial, shows the complex human experience behind the objects, especially in globalized imperial and post-imperial context. And it makes me wonder whether this personal experience, very complex and maybe dialectic, created by material culture and by the context of its existence, can be actually caught and understood by scholars. But I think we should try to catch this and understood it. So this is the moment when every single person here thinks, okay, so what? You told some stories, delivered some pieces of Historia Illustrata, but what is it all about? What is the end game, the ultimate goal? What is the meaning of your paper? Well, here you can see Siberian Ninja Turtles, and I think that I have to be honest. This paper is more about raising questions than about providing answers and giving advice. But I think that looking at our own experience and thinking of them when we work with the evidence from the past makes us understand the people of the past and helps us to build multiple and discrepant experiences, not only the experience of colonizer and colonized, but the experience of different groups of people, Well, because I've shared today, the stories and details I've shared today now, they come from my own experience, but at the same time, the same things were experienced differently by the kid, not from Kaluga, but from Moscow, from Surgut, from St. Petersburg, from Vladivostok, by the kid who was raised by both parents, not by a single mother like me, by the kid who was able to go abroad in the childhood or who was stuck in his small town, again, like me. So there is a lot of experiences, and I guess we need to try to understand, to reconstruct and understand as many of them as we can. This may help us to avoid frames and rigid limits of theoretical thinking, extra-theoretical thinking, of our conceptual framework. And this may help us to learn more about the present. And this may help us to imagine. Of course, it doesn't give us a ground for a direct comparison between Russian and Roman reality. It was completely different. They were completely different realities. But it may feed our imagination. And as Robin Collingwood once, I believe that the historical research cannot work properly without some imagination. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anton.